The security camera footage shows her slipping through the broken fence at 2:47 a.m., her designer heels clicking against the pool deck like a countdown to disaster. She thinks she's so clever, using my backyard as her personal playground while I'm away. But what she doesn't know is that I've been watching every move, planning every detail. The new lock isn't just to keep her out, it's to keep her in. And when she discovers what I've added to the water, when she realizes the sweet smell isn't chlorine but something far more dangerous, her smug smile will disappear forever. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and tonight, Karma has very sharp teeth. The first time Rebecca Chen saw her, she was floating face down in the pool. Not dead, thank God, not dead, but unconscious, her platinum blonde hair fanned out like seaweed around her head, designer bikini still perfectly positioned despite whatever had happened. Rebecca dropped her morning coffee, the ceramic mug shattering against the flagstone as she rushed to the pool's edge, her nurse's instincts kicking in before rational thought could catch up. Hey! Rebecca plunged her hand into the water, grabbing the woman's shoulder. Hey, wake up! The woman's eyes snapped open, crystal blue and completely alert. Too alert for someone who'd just been unconscious. A slow smile spread across her face as she treaded water with practiced ease. Oh my God, you scared me. The woman laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I'm so sorry, I didn't think anyone was home. Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. Who are you? What are you doing in my pool? I'm Vivian. The woman swam to the pool's edge with graceful strokes, pulling herself up onto the coping in one fluid motion. Water cascaded off her tan skin, and she didn't seem the least bit embarrassed about the situation. Vivian Marsh. I live next door. Rebecca glanced toward the neighboring house, a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion that had been empty for months. That house has been for sale forever. Just closed escrow yesterday. Vivian wrung water from her hair, sending droplets sparkling in the morning sun. I was so excited to take a swim, but my pool guy won't be here until next week. Your fence has this little gap right there. She pointed to a section near the property line, and I thought, well, what harm could it do? Just a quick swim. The audacity of it took Rebecca's breath away. You broke into my backyard. Broken sounds so dramatic. Vivian's smile never wavered. I prefer borrowed. And I wasn't hurting anything. Your pool is gorgeous. By the way. Much nicer than mine will be. Rebecca studied her new neighbor. Mid-30s, perfectly maintained, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Everything about her screamed money, from the designer bikini to the subtle diamond studs in her ears to the way she carried herself like she owned the world. Look, I'm sorry if I startled you, Vivian continued, toweling off with what Rebecca now realized was one of her own pool towels. I'll be more careful next time. Next time. Rebecca's voice pitched higher. There won't be a next time. This is private property. Vivian's laugh was light, dismissive. Oh, come on. We are neighbors now. What's mine is yours, right? Besides, you're at work most of the day. I checked. She said this last part with such casual honesty that it took Rebecca a moment to process the implications. You checked my schedule. I'm observant. Vivian shrugged, slipping her feet into expensive-looking sandals. Hospital nurse, right? 12-hour shifts. I saw you leaving at 6:30 this morning in your scrubs. Very dedicated. A chill ran down Rebecca's spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. You've been watching me. Not watching. Observing. There's a difference. Vivian gathered. Her things: a designer bag, sunglasses, a water bottle that definitely wasn't Rebecca's. I like to know my neighbors. Makes for better relationships. Better relationships don't involve trespassing. Oh, Rebecca. Vivian's voice carried a note of condescension that made Rebecca's teeth clench. Don't be so uptight. Life's too short to worry about property lines. Besides, what are you going to do? Call the police. Tell them your new neighbor borrowed your pool for an hour. The worst part was, Vivian was right. What could Rebecca say? That she'd found a woman swimming in her pool who claimed to be her. Neighbor. That no actual crime had been committed beyond trespassing, which would be nearly impossible to prove after the fact. I'm fixing that fence, Rebecca said firmly. Good idea. Safety first. Vivian's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Though I hope you don't mind if I use the pool until mine's ready. The fence won't stop me, you know. I'm very resourceful. She said it so casually, like she was discussing the weather. Rebecca felt her composure cracking. You can't just. Can't what? Swim. It's not like you're using it during the day. Vivian gestured toward the pristine pool, its surface already smooth again. Such a waste, really. All that beautiful water just sitting there. Rebecca opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. There was something about Vivian's tone, the way she spoke as if Rebecca's objections were merely suggestions, that made her feel like she was losing an argument she hadn't even started. I need to get ready for work, Rebecca said instead. Of course. Don't let me keep you. Vivian headed toward the gap in the fence, then paused. Oh, and Rebecca. Thanks for the swim. The water temperature is perfect. Rebecca watched her neighbor slip through the fence with practiced ease, her heart still racing from the encounter. She'd been living in this house for 3 years, had specifically chosen it for its privacy and quiet neighborhood. The backyard was her sanctuary, the pool her refuge after long shifts at the hospital. Now it felt violated. She spent the rest of the morning on the phone with fence contractors, but the earliest anyone could come out was the following week. The gap wasn't large, maybe 18 inches at its widest point, but clearly large enough for Vivian to squeeze through. By the time Rebecca left for her shift at St. Mary's Hospital, she'd installed a temporary barrier of chicken wire and zip ties. It looked terrible, but it would have to do. Her shift started badly and got worse. 3 trauma cases in the first hour, a code blue that lasted 45 minutes, and a family member who screamed at her for 10 minutes about visiting hours. By lunch, Rebecca was running on fumes and caffeine. You look like hell, said Janet, her charge nurse, sliding into the break room chair across from her. Thanks. You know just what to say to make a girl feel special. Seriously, what's wrong? You've been distracted all morning. Rebecca hesitated. How could she explain that her new neighbor had basically announced her intention to continue trespassing? That she'd felt more unsettled by one conversation than she had by any of the genuine emergencies she'd handled at work. New neighbor. Issues, she said finally. Loud music. Barking dog. More like boundary issues. Janet snorted. Welcome to suburbia. My neighbor keeps putting his trash cans on my side of the property line. I've been moving them back every week for 2 years. This is different. Different how? Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her blood turned to ice. The message was from an unknown number, but the attached photo was unmistakable, her backyard, shot from inside the pool area, showing her hastily erected chicken wire barrier. The angle suggested it had been taken from the diving board. The message read, "Nice try. Water's still perfect. Thanks. Rebecca." Janet's voice seemed to come from far away. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Rebecca stared at the phone screen, her hands trembling. She'd left for work at 6:30 a.m. It was now 1:15 p.m. Vivian had been in her pool for hours, long enough to get comfortable, long enough to mock her security measures. Long enough to make it clear that this was just the beginning. I have to go, Rebecca said, standing so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. You can't leave in the middle of your shift. I'm sick. Food poisoning. Cover for me. She was out the door before Janet could protest, her heart pounding as she drove home through afternoon traffic. The chicken wire barrier was exactly where she'd left it, but it had been carefully cut and taped back together, a temporary modification that would be invisible unless you knew what to look for. Rebecca's hands shook as she examined the fence. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. This was a challenge. A statement. Vivian wasn't just using her pool, she was claiming it. The war had begun, and Rebecca had just realized she was fighting someone who played by completely different rules. She pulled out her phone and started researching security systems, her jaw set with determination. If Vivian wanted to play games, Rebecca would make sure she was ready for whatever came next. But as she scrolled through camera options and alarm systems, one thought kept echoing in her mind: what did she really know about her new neighbor? And more importantly, what was Vivian capable of? The answer would come sooner than she expected, and it would change everything. Rebecca's hands were still shaking as she installed the first security camera at 4:30 a.m., 2 hours before her next shift. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with images of Vivian's mocking smile and that casual threat: the fence won't stop me, you know. I'm very resourceful. The camera was motion-activated, weatherproof, and connected to an app on her phone. She positioned it to capture the entire pool area, including the gap in the fence. If Vivian wanted to play games, Rebecca would document every single violation. The second camera went on the back porch, angled to cover the approach to the pool. The third would have to wait. She was already running late for work, and the hospital didn't tolerate tardiness. She'd made it halfway to her car when she heard the splash. Rebecca froze, her keys digging into her palm. The sound had come from her backyard. From her pool. Her phone buzzed with a motion alert from the camera app. With trembling fingers, she opened the notification and watched in real time as Vivian surfaced in the deep end, her platinum hair slicked back, looking directly at the camera with that same infuriating smile. Vivian waved. Rebecca's vision blurred with rage. She marched back to the fence, her scrubs still wrinkled from the night before, and found the chicken wire had been cut again, this time more extensively, creating a neat doorway that had been carefully taped back together. Get out! Rebecca shouted over the fence. Get out of my pool right now! Vivian continued her lazy backstroke, seemingly oblivious to Rebecca's fury. Good morning, neighbor. Early shift today. I'm calling the police. For what? Swimming. Vivian flipped onto her stomach, executing a perfect butterfly stroke. I'm not damaging anything. I'm actually improving your water circulation. Rebecca pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling over the numbers. But as she started to dial, Vivian's voice stopped her. You know, Rebecca, I did some research on you last night. Very impressive career. 20 years in nursing, specializing in trauma care. Divorced 3 years ago, nasty business, from what I could find in the court records. No children. No family nearby. Vivian's voice carried easily across the water, conversational despite the distance. Must be lonely, all that dedication to helping others with no one to help you. Ice formed in Rebecca's stomach. How do you? Public records are amazing these days. Did you know your ex-husband filed a restraining order? Something about you following him to his new apartment, showing up at his workplace. The judge dismissed it, but still. Must have been embarrassing for someone so professional. Rebecca's phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering on the concrete. The restraining order had been Marcus's desperate attempt to make her the villain in their divorce. She'd been trying to retrieve her belongings from their shared apartment, had gone to his office to discuss the division of assets. All perfectly legal, all perfectly reasonable, but Marcus had painted it as stalking. Of course, I don't judge, Vivian continued, now floating on her back, her voice drifting up to the morning sky. We all have our passionate moments. The important thing is learning from them. The threat was clear. Rebecca bent to retrieve her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. You stay away from me, Rebecca managed. I'm not near you, darling. I'm in your pool. There's a difference. Vivian's laugh echoed off the water. But I do appreciate the security system. Very thorough. Though I should mention, some of those cameras are pointing toward my property. That could be problematic. From a legal standpoint. Rebecca looked up at the cameras she'd installed, realizing with growing horror that Vivian was right. The angle required to capture the pool area inevitably included part of the neighboring yard. I'm sure it's just an oversight, Vivian added, pulling herself up onto the pool's edge. Easy to fix. Just adjust the angles a bit. We wouldn't want any legal complications between neighbors. Rebecca watched her new neighbor towel off with practiced efficiency, using another of Rebecca's pool towels without permission. Everything about Vivian's movements was calculated, confident. She wasn't just trespassing, she was claiming territory. "I have to go to work," Rebecca said, hating how defeated she sounded. "Of course you do. Someone has to pay for all this." Vivian gestured around the backyard, taking in the pool, the landscaping, the house. "Must be expensive, maintaining all this on a single income. Especially with the alimony payments." How could she possibly know about the alimony? Rebecca's divorce records were sealed, the financial arrangements confidential. But somehow, Vivian had found out. "Have a wonderful day at work," Vivian called as Rebecca stumbled toward her car. "Don't worry about me. I'll take good care of everything while you're gone." Rebecca's shift passed in a blur of mistakes and near misses. She mixed up patient medications twice, forgot to log vital signs, and snapped at a resident who was only trying to help. By lunch, Janet had pulled her aside for the second time in 2 days. "This is about more than neighbor problems," Janet said, closing the break room door behind them. "You're a liability right now. What's really going on?" Rebecca stared at her sandwich, unable to take a bite. "She knows things. Personal things. About my divorce, my finances. Things that aren't public record." "Who knows things?" "My neighbor. She's been in my pool every day, and when I confront her, she threatens me with information I don't know how she got." Janet frowned. "Have you considered that maybe she's just good at research? People can find out a lot online these days. Not this much. Not this detailed." Rebecca pulled out her phone, checking the camera app. Sure enough, there was Vivian, floating peacefully in the deep end, occasionally glancing up at the camera with that same mocking smile. "She's there right now," Rebecca said, showing Janet the screen. "In your pool. During the day. Every day. She said she's observant, that she knows my schedule. She knows I work 12-hour shifts, knows when I leave, knows when I come home." Janet's expression grew serious. "Rebecca, that's stalking behavior. You need to document this, file a report." "With what evidence?" "She's technically not breaking any laws. Trespassing is a misdemeanor at best, and she could claim she had permission." "Permission? From who?" Rebecca laughed bitterly. "That's the thing. She acts like she doesn't need permission. Like property lines are just suggestions." Her phone buzzed with another motion alert. This time, the camera showed Vivian climbing out of the pool, but she wasn't alone. A man in a business suit was standing at the pool's edge, nodding as Vivian pointed toward Rebecca's house. "Who is that?" Janet asked, looking over Rebecca's shoulder. "I don't know." Rebecca's mouth went dry. "But they are looking at my house. Like they are planning something." The man was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of predatory smile that made Rebecca's skin crawl. He was taking photos with his phone, capturing different angles of the backyard, the house, the pool area. "I have to go," Rebecca said, standing abruptly. "You can't keep leaving work early. Henderson's already asking questions." "Then I'll use sick time. Personal time. Whatever it takes." Rebecca was out the door before Janet could respond, her heart pounding as she drove home through afternoon traffic. The man's presence had transformed the situation from annoying neighbor dispute to something far more sinister. Who was he? What did he want with her property? She pulled into her driveway to find both Vivian and the stranger gone, but the cameras had captured everything. Rebecca downloaded the footage, watching in growing alarm as the man measured distances, examined the fence line, and spent considerable time studying the house itself. At one point, he'd walked directly up to the back door and peered through the windows, his hands cupped around his face to block the glare. Vivian had stood beside him, pointing out details Rebecca couldn't identify from the camera angle. The most disturbing part was how comfortable they seemed. This wasn't a chance encounter, they knew each other well. The man deferred to Vivian's opinions, nodded at her suggestions, and followed her lead through the entire inspection. Rebecca's blood ran cold when she realized what she was watching. It looked like a property assessment. Like someone was evaluating her home for purchase, renovation, or demolition. Her phone rang, startling her from the footage. Unknown number. Hello. Rebecca. This is Vivian. I hope you don't mind, I got your number from the neighborhood directory. I wanted to apologize for earlier. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Rebecca's grip tightened on the phone. Who was that man in my backyard? Man. Oh, you mean David. He's my contractor. I was showing him the property line so he'll know where to put the new fence. Between our yards, I mean. For privacy. He was looking at my house. Well, yes. He needs to understand the full scope of the project. But don't worry, everything we discussed was about my property, not yours. The lie was so smooth, so casually delivered, that Rebecca almost believed it. Almost. I want you to stay out of my pool, Rebecca said firmly. Of course. Once my pool is ready, I won't need to borrow yours anymore. Should be another week or two. Starting now. Not in another week. There was a pause, and when Vivian spoke again, her voice had lost its friendly tone. Rebecca, I understand you're feeling territorial, but let's be reasonable. I'm not hurting anything. I'm not damaging your property. I'm simply using a resource that would otherwise go to waste. It's not your resource to use. Isn't it? Rebecca didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, diving deeper into the digital footprint of Vivian Marsh. What she found made her stomach turn. There was no record of Vivian Marsh purchasing the house next door. No deed transfer, no mortgage records, no property tax assessments. According to the county records, the house was still owned by Eastbrook Development, a company that had been trying to sell it for 8 months. But there was a Vivian Marsh in the public records, just not the one living next door. This Vivian Marsh had died in a car accident in Phoenix 3 years ago. Single, no children, no living relatives. The perfect identity to steal. Rebecca's hands trembled as she cross-referenced the death certificate with social media profiles. Credit reports, anything that might reveal who her neighbor really was. At 3 a.m., she found it, a single photo on a real estate blog from 2 years ago, showing a woman with dark hair and brown eyes standing next to a sold sign in front of a house in Riverside. The caption read, "Congratulations to Sandra Martinez on her successful property flip. Another happy client of Morrison Development." Rebecca stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. Sandra Martinez. Morrison Development. The same David Morrison who had been metering her backyard. She screen-capped everything, her mind racing. Sandra Martinez had been using a dead woman's identity to pose as her neighbor. But why? What was the endgame? Rebecca's phone buzzed with a motion alert from the pool camera. At 3:17 a.m., someone was moving in her backyard. She opened the app, expecting to see Vivian or Sandra taking another midnight swim. Instead, she saw David Morrison with 2 other men, all wearing dark clothing and carrying what looked like surveying equipment. They weren't just metering now. They were digging. Rebecca grabbed her phone and crept toward the back door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the window, she could see flashlight beams moving methodically across her property. One of the men was taking soil samples near the pool's edge. Another was measuring distances from the property line to her house. The third man was David Morrison, and he was drilling holes in her fence. Rebecca's hands shook as she dialed 911, but before she could hit send, her phone rang. Unknown number. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Sandra's voice was calm, almost conversational. Calling the police at this hour about men on your property could lead to a misunderstandings. What are you doing to my yard? Environmental assessment. Standard procedure for property development. I'm sure you understand, nurses' training includes basic chemistry, doesn't it? Rebecca's blood ran cold. Environmental assessment for what? Oh, didn't I mention? There's been a complaint filed with the county about potential contamination on your property. Pool chemicals, you know. Improper disposal, possible groundwater contamination. Very serious stuff. That's impossible. I maintain my pool according to all regulations. Of course you do. But complaints require investigation. And if the investigation finds evidence of contamination. Sandra's voice trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. Rebecca watched through the window as one of the men sealed a soil sample in a plastic container. You're planting evidence. I'm documenting existing conditions. What the county finds in their analysis is up to them. Sandra's laugh was soft, almost gentle. But I should mention, contaminated properties can be very difficult to sell. The cleanup costs alone can exceed the home's value. This is fraud. This is business, Rebecca. And you're in the way of progress. The line went dead. Rebecca stood frozen at her back door, watching as the three men finished their work and disappeared through the gap in her fence. By the time she worked up the courage to go outside, they were gone, leaving only small holes in the ground and the lingering smell of chemicals. She spent the rest of the night documenting everything, screenshots of the camera footage, photos of the disturbed soil, detailed notes about the conversation with Sandra. By morning, she had enough evidence to file a police report. The officer who responded was young, probably fresh out of the academy, with the kind of skeptical expression that said he'd rather be anywhere else. So let me get this straight. Officer Martinez said, flipping through his notepad. Your neighbor, who you think is using a fake identity, had men dig holes in your yard at 3 in the morning to plant evidence of environmental contamination. I know how it sounds, but do you have any proof that these men actually planted anything? Or that your neighbor is using a false identity? Rebecca showed him the death certificate, the real estate blog photo, the camera footage. Officer Martinez dutifully looked at everything, but his expression remained skeptical. This woman in the photo doesn't look like your neighbor, he said finally. That's because she's wearing a disguise. Hair color, contacts, maybe some cosmetic surgery. But look at the bone structure, the way she holds herself. I can't file a report based on speculation about disguises and bone structure. And the men in your yard could have been legitimate environmental investigators. At 3 in the morning. Environmental contamination is a serious matter. If there's been a complaint filed, the county has a right to investigate. Rebecca felt the walls closing in around her. Can you at least check if there's actually been a complaint filed? I can look into it. But in the meantime, I'd suggest you focus on documented violations. Trespassing, property damage, harassment. Things I can actually verify. After Officer Martinez left, Rebecca called the county environmental office. The clerk confirmed her worst fears. A complaint had been filed 3 days ago, alleging improper disposal of pool chemicals and potential groundwater contamination at her address. The complainant was listed as anonymous concerned neighbor. When will you be conducting the investigation? Rebecca asked. Our inspector is scheduled for tomorrow morning. You'll need to provide access to your property for soil and water testing. Rebecca hung up, her hands shaking. Sandra had set the trap perfectly. The anonymous complaint would trigger an official investigation. The evidence planted in her yard would be discovered by county inspectors. Her property would be declared contaminated, making it nearly impossible to sell and potentially forcing her into bankruptcy trying to clean it up. But Sandra had made one mistake. She'd assumed Rebecca would be passive, would accept defeat like a good victim. She didn't know that Rebecca had spent 20 years in trauma nursing, where thinking fast and fighting hard meant the difference between life and death. Rebecca pulled out her phone and called Janet. I need a favor, she said without preamble. A big one. Rebecca, it's barely 7 a.m. What's wrong? I need you to help me test something. Remember your friend Linda who works at the independent lab? The one who does soil analysis? Yeah, why? I need to know what's really in my backyard. And I need to know before the county inspector gets here tomorrow. Janet was quiet for a moment. This is about your neighbor, isn't it? It's about someone trying to destroy my life. And I'm not going to let them. What do you need me to do? Rebecca spent the next hour collecting her own soil samples, carefully documenting the exact locations where she'd seen the men digging. She sealed each sample in sterile containers, labeled them with precise coordinates, and photographed everything. Janet met her at the independent lab, where Linda agreed to rush the analysis in exchange for covering her nephew's emergency room. Bill from the previous month. Results should be ready by this afternoon, Linda said, accepting the samples. But I should warn you, if you write about someone planting evidence, proving it won't be easy. Contamination looks the same whether it's natural or artificial. I'm not trying to prove they planted it, Rebecca said. I'm trying to prove when they planted it. Linda raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Pool chemicals break down over time. If someone dumped a large quantity of chlorine or acid in specific locations, the concentration levels would be astronomical, much higher than what you'd see from years of gradual contamination. Smart, Linda nodded. Artificial contamination would show up as localized hot spots with concentrations that don't match the surrounding soil. Rebecca left the lab with the first hope she'd felt in days. But as she drove home, she noticed a black sedan following her. It stayed 3 cars back, matching her turns, maintaining the same distance. She pulled into a gas station, and the sedan drove past. But when she got back on the road, it was there again, following the same pattern. By the time Rebecca reached her house, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the key. The sedan continued down the street, but she caught a glimpse of the driver in her rearview mirror. It was David Morrison. Rebecca sat in her driveway, engine running, paralyzed by the realization that she was being watched. Every move she made was being monitored, analyzed, counted. Sandra and her team weren't just trying to steal her property, they were systematically destroying her life. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Nice try with the lab. But you're fighting a war you can't win. Last chance to walk away. Rebecca stared at the message, fury building in her chest. They thought they could intimidate her. They thought she'd roll over and accept defeat. They had no idea what they were dealing with. She pulled out her phone and typed back. Try me. The response came in. Rebecca's first stop was the medical supply closet at St. Mary's Hospital. After 20 years of service, she knew exactly which security cameras had blind spots, which supply rooms were rarely monitored, and which medications were tracked versus those that weren't. She wasn't stealing, technically. Everything she took was either expired or about to expire, destined for the hazardous waste disposal anyway. A few vials of sodium chloride solution, some syringes, medical tubing, and a bottle of concentrated iodine solution that had been sitting in the back of the pharmacy for months. The key ingredient came from the hospital's physical therapy department, a bottle of methylene blue used for marking injection sites during certain procedures. Harmless to humans in small doses, but it would stain everything it touched a brilliant, unmistakable blue. By the time Rebecca got home, she had a plan. The soil sample results from Linda's lab had confirmed her suspicions. The contamination was artificial, concentrated chemical dumps in specific locations that showed none of the gradual dispersion patterns of natural contamination. More importantly, the chemical signature was wrong. The compounds found in her soil weren't consistent with pool maintenance chemicals at all. They were industrial solvents, the kind used in construction and demolition work. Rebecca photographed every page of the report, uploaded them to a secure cloud account, and sent copies to herself at 3 different email addresses. Then she called Officer Martinez. I have proof, she said without preamble. The contamination in my yard is artificial. I have lab results showing. I appreciate your thoroughness, but the county inspector will handle the environmental assessment. That's not within my jurisdiction. But this proves fraud. Someone is deliberately. What it proves is that you had an independent lab analyze soil samples. For all I know, you could have contaminated those samples yourself. Rebecca's grip tightened on the phone. Why would I contaminate my own property? Insurance fraud is more common than you'd think. Property owners sometimes create problems to force insurance payouts or justify legal action. The accusation hit like a physical blow. They'd thought of everything. Even if Rebecca proved the contamination was artificial, she'd be the most logical suspect. I'm trying to protect my property, not destroy it. I'm sure you are. But I can't take action based on speculation. If you have concrete evidence of criminal activity, bring it to me. Otherwise, let the county handle the environmental investigation. Rebecca hung up, her hands shaking with rage. Sandra had played this perfectly. Every move Rebecca made to defend herself could be twisted into evidence of her guilt. But Sandra had also made a crucial mistake. She'd assumed Rebecca would continue playing by the rules. That evening, Rebecca sat in her kitchen with the medical supplies spread across the table like a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The methylene blue solution was the key, a harmless but permanent marker that would identify anyone who came into contact with it. She'd mixed it with sodium chloride solution to create a compound that would be absorbed through the skin on contact. Anyone who touched a treated surface would carry traces of the blue dye for days, invisible to the naked eye but clearly visible under ultraviolet light. Rebecca had borrowed a UV lamp from the hospital's dermatology department. She started with the pool equipment, the filter housing, the pump controls, the pH testing kit. Every surface that Sandra touched during her daily swims was carefully treated with the solution and allowed to dry. The dye was colorless once dry, virtually undetectable. Next came the fence. Rebecca treated the gap where Sandra squeezed through, focusing on the edges where she'd have to grip the wire. The pool deck followed, then the diving board, the ladder. Even the towels Sandra had been stealing. By midnight, Rebecca had turned her backyard into a forensic trap. Anyone who trespassed would be marked, whether they knew it or not. She didn't have to wait long. The motion sensor triggered at 5:47 a.m., just as Rebecca was preparing to leave for work. She watched through the camera app as Sandra slipped through the fence gap, moving with the confident ease of someone who'd made this trip dozens of times. Rebecca held her breath as Sandra approached the pool equipment, checking the chemical levels as she always did. The woman's hands moved expertly over the controls, adjusting settings, testing the water temperature. Perfect. Sandra's swim lasted 45 minutes. She used the diving board, touched the pool ladder, and dried off with one of Rebecca's towels. By the time she slipped back through the fence, she'd come into contact with treated surfaces at least a dozen times. Rebecca smiled grimly as she drove to work. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 began during her lunch break. Rebecca drove to the hardware store and purchased a motion-activated sprinkler system, the kind used to deter deer and other garden pests. The salesman was enthusiastic about the product's effectiveness. "These things work great," he said, loading the system into Rebecca's car. The motion sensor is sensitive enough to detect anything larger than a cat, and the water spray is powerful enough to reach 30 feet. What if someone tries to disable it? That's the beauty of this model. It's got a tamper-proof housing and a backup battery. Plus, if someone tries to block the sensor, it defaults to constant spray mode. Rebecca installed the system that evening, positioning it to cover the gap in the fence and the approach to the pool. The sprinkler was connected to her garden hose, but she'd made a special modification to the water supply. Instead of pure water, the system would spray a mixture of water and her methylene blue solution. Anyone who triggered the system would be soaked in the marking compound. The final touch was a small surveillance camera hidden in the sprinkler housing, providing a clear view of anyone who approached the fence. Rebecca connected it to a separate app on her phone, one that would send alerts directly to her smartwatch. By 11 p.m., the trap was set. Rebecca barely slept, checking her phone every few minutes for motion alerts. At 3:23 a.m., the system triggered. She opened the app to see David Morrison and another man approaching her fence, both carrying bolt cutters and what looked like electronic devices. They were dressed in dark clothing and moved with military precision. Rebecca watched as Morrison examined the fence gap, searching for the usual entry point. When he found it, he reached out to grip the wire and immediately jerked his hand back. Even in the grainy night vision footage, Rebecca could see him examining his palm, confusion clear on his face. He said something to his companion, who pulled out a small device and began scanning the fence. It looked like a chemical detector. Rebecca's blood ran cold. They weren't just trespassing anymore, they were using sophisticated equipment to detect her countermeasures. This wasn't a simple property grab by opportunistic criminals. This was a professional operation. Morrison's companion finished his scan and shook his head. He pointed to several areas along the fence, apparently indicating contamination. Morrison nodded and pulled out his bolt cutters. Instead of using the gap, he began cutting a new hole in the fence, carefully avoiding the areas his companion had marked. They were adapting, learning, evolving their approach. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed Rebecca's trap was limited to the fence. Morrison stepped through the new hole and immediately triggered the motion-activated sprinkler system. The spray caught him full in the face, soaking him with the methylene blue solution. He stumbled backward, cursing, as his companion was also drenched. Rebecca watched with satisfaction as both men retreated, their dark clothing now saturated with the marking compound. They'd been tagged, whether they knew it or not. But her satisfaction was short-lived. Morrison's companion was already setting up what looked like a larger device, something with multiple antennas and a display screen. A signal jammer. Rebecca's camera feed went dead. She grabbed her UV lamp and raced to the back door, but by the time she reached the window, the men were gone. The only evidence of their presence was the new hole in her fence and the wet concrete where the sprinkler had activated. But it was enough. Rebecca had captured clear footage of their faces, their equipment, their license plate as they'd driven away. More importantly, she'd marked them with a substance that would be visible under UV light for days. The next morning, Rebecca called in sick to work and drove to the county environmental office. The inspector was a middle-aged man named Thompson. With the weary look of someone who'd seen every type of environmental disaster imaginable. "I need to show you something before you test my property," Rebecca said, setting up her UV lamp in his office. "I can't allow you to interfere with an official investigation. I'm not interfering. I'm providing evidence." Rebecca switched on the UV lamp and held out the towel Sandra had used the day before. Under the ultraviolet light, brilliant blue handprints glowed across the fabric. Thompson's expression changed immediately. "What is that?" "Methylene blue. A medical dye that's absorbed through skin contact. Someone has been trespassing on my property repeatedly, and I marked them to prove it. This is highly irregular. So is planting evidence to frame someone for environmental contamination." Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed him the footage of Morrison and his companion. "These men were in my yard at 3 a.m. yesterday, using chemical detection equipment.